This is a presentation of OneLogin training.
Welcome to Configuring the Office 365 V2 App Connector, Part 4. Finally, we get to enable SSO. Now, configuring single sign-on for Office 365 is actually incredibly simple if you use the Automatic Configuration tab. Once you've configured your API connection, matched up all your parameters, basically gone through that lovely checklist that they have there, then all you need to do is click on the Enable Automatic Saml Configuration, that little toggle right there. The only trick is to remember, again, you cannot configure federation with your primary Azure AD domain, the default one, nor the one that has onmicrosoft.com in it. Have to be configured with a custom domain that basically you've registered with Azure AD. If you wish, we do have a manual configuration tab as well that you can use to configure the SAML endpoint and such. It gives you a certificate you need to exchange and a few other pieces of information, but really, the easiest thing to do is just click on the Enable Automatic SAML Configuration toggle right there, and you're good to go. So, let's go take a look at it. So, one of the easiest steps you'll ever have to set up. Go to the SSO tab here, and there's my handy dandy little toggle. Click on it, give a little pop-up. Got it, let's go. I already have the API stuff configured. Bum, ba-da-bum, ba-da-bum, bum, bum. We're connecting, we're configuring, we're communicating. Yes, as with most status things, not the most accurate, but now we are done. Woohoo! Click next. Make sure it's assigned to my users, and voila. For our final step, we just need to make sure that it's going to be visible in the portal to our users. So toggle the visible in portal back to enable, click save, and we're ready to go. Let's go test it on out. Again, last bit, we're going to make this guy visible in the portal. Click on save. And in a separate browser, I'm logged in as one of my users, and I can see Office 365 here. And we're gonna click on it, and it's going to allow us into Microsoft Online. Woohoo! That's what we wanted. Now you have your users set up so that they will be automatically created and assigned licenses to Office 365, as long as they're assigned to the App Connector. They can log into Office 365 as long as they can log into OneLogin. Before we conclude this course, though, we want to talk just a little bit about client-side authentication, i.e. accessing emails through the Outlook desktop client or joining a meeting with Skype for business client. Now, when it comes to client-side authentication, the main term that's thrown around is modern authentication. Modern authentication is a Microsoft feature that needs to be enabled on the client systems that are running Microsoft Office applications. Without modern authentication being enabled, features like requiring MFA for login would not be enforced when a client is trying to access their email from the Outlook client or a Skype for Business meeting. On the client side, the system needs to have a minimum of Office 2013 version 15.04753.1001 installed. And a change must be made to the registry to enable modern authentication for those running the appropriate version of Office 2013. For those running Office 2016 or later, the feature is already enabled, so no registry change is needed. Most Office 365 online offerings have modern authentication enabled by default, unless the Office 365 tenant was created before 2017. For those online server services, the features then need to be enabled via PowerShell. So for Exchange Online, you need to run the commands you see on the slide to connect to Exchange Online, and then enable the feature by setting the organization config. For Skype for Business Online, you need to download and install the Skype for Business Online Windows PowerShell module. Then you can run the commands you see on the slide and enable modern auth for Skype. When discussing certain client applications and their ability to connect to Office 365, WS Trust is also brought up. WS Trust is basically an older authentication that was used by Microsoft and replaced nowadays by authentication protocols like WSFed and Saml. Office 365 fully supports modern authentication. Therefore, it really no longer needs WS Trust to be enabled. However, some organizations might still be using particular apps that don't support modern authentication. So they need to know what their options are when it comes to WS Trust. Well, the first option is to keep it disabled. It's disabled by default in our interface. Again, we recommend you keep it disabled. So keep it disabled and upgrade your application so they support modern auth. Now, of course, that might not always be possible. So if it's not possible, then try the second option, where you can use IP address restrictions. So some devices or applications, again, might not support modern auth. You might not even have the ability to upgrade them. So if that's the case, you can apply an IP address restriction to the WS Trust part of your Office 365 integration in OneLogin. The endpoint should only be accessible for requests coming from relevant Microsoft IP addresses. Careful, because those IP addresses could change over time, so that means that you need to update them. The third option is to enable and require the multiple auth end claim. So again, if you can't upgrade or get away from using WS Trust, you can enable this multiple auth N over on the Azure AD side. This requires that OneLogin's certified Azure AD that the user was prompted for a second factor authentication during login. This type of configuration also has to be done through PowerShell. You'd use a command like you see there on the slide, set MSOL domain federation settings. Bottom line is, if you're using client software developed after 2016, shouldn't have to be worrying about modern authentication. It's enabled by default. Shouldn't have to worry about WS Trust. It's disabled by default. If you're using older software, then you have to start making some choices. All right, we are finally done. Your users have been assigned to an Office 365 app connector. They can now see the tile from OneLogin portal, and they can log straight into Office 365. This concludes the last part of configuring the Office 365 V2 app connector.
This is a presentation of OneLogin Training.